I'm so happy to welcome Tim O'Reilly, the CEO and chairman of O'Reilly Media, to the Look Back podcast. And we have plenty to look back on, but we're also going to spend some time looking forward as there's so much going on. And Tim is really crystallized a lot of views on AI and its impact on technology, its impact on society. I've read a lot of his work lately. Tim, you're also doing a lot on the investment side with AlphaTech and Ventures. But as I welcome you to the podcast, I mentioned, and we were joking earlier about how we shared a lot of similar time working in the media space and working at the tech companies that I worked for, and you, of course, started O'Reilly Media. So welcome to the podcast.
All right. Well, great to be here.
Well, at that point, NVIDIA didn't step in the shoes of Intel. They created their own shoes, right?
No, but they did in some sense step into the shoes of Intel in the sense of they became, if you look, there's in each of those transitions, there's been a winner who said, okay, we're going to find, what, the limiting resource. And we're going to corner that. I remember Pat Gelsinger told me once that the original IBM deal was that every product for the PC had to be available from at least two sources. And so it was, I think it was with the 386. Remember the original 8086, it was like there were clones. There were clones of the 286.
Right.
Then it comes to 386. And as Pat said, he was on the executive committee at the time, and he said, we decided basically, Andy says, let's stand up to
IBM.
to IBM,
That's right.
and we're gonna say no. We think we have enough market power that we can just say no. We're not giving away the design of the 386. It's going to only be from us. And he said we had a vote, and the vote was 3-2 against it. But Andy was one of the two, so we did it anyway.
I love that story. Now
Yeah,
come back.
it is, but I guess the point is just kind of get back to this
Yeah,
main idea. You know, this disruption has to happen.
yeah.
And right now when you see DeepSeek, open weights, they've actually published it under an MIT license now, the latest version.
Oh,
This is like truly like, okay, we just knocked the feet out from under anybody who thinks that owning the model is going to give them a defensible moat. Now, of course, people saw this early. There was a memo out of Google 2 or 3 years ago saying there is no moat, you know, and it really. But now the game of the true competitive market for what does the AI future look like is just beginning.
wow. Fantastic. So you did, I did see that paper you wrote. I remember reading it when it first came out a few months ago about the end of programming as we know it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a thread to that conversation that talks about jobs, and there's a thread, Tim, I don't know if you mentioned it in subsequent pieces or in that piece where you were talking about coding and, you know, everything's going to be moved from the coders to AI, and that job's going to be difficult. But you had a contrarian view on that as well. Can you go into that for a minute?
Yeah, I can. Well, first off, I think we've seen this movie before.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of like, oh, this is the end of programming or whatever, and it really isn't. Uh, we still have. I mean, again, the job is going to change, no question. And I don't know what it's going to look like for sure in a number of years, but it's changed a lot in the 40 years of my career, and each time there's more capability, there's more people doing it, and the field has just gotten bigger. It's a little bit like, from the point of view of somebody who's in a privileged position, one of these transitions can always look like the end, but it's a bigger beginning. And just coming back to our shared experience of the media industry, for example. Um, I remember talking with what were their names at CMP? The
Leeds family?
Mike, what?
Michael and Jerry Leeds?
Yeah, Mike Leeds. I was talking with Mike Leeds, and he was just talking about how, it's like they would spin up these new publications. He said, if we don't get one up to $10 million in 2 years, we throw it away. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what's wrong with you guys. Because here, like Mike Arrington gets, TechCrunch on the web, can make 10 million is a lot of money to him. So you guys are toast. You're just telling me that your business model hasn't adapted. And the same thing, I think about all these people who are in the news industry who are like, this is the end of news. This is the end of, and you're looking around their big fancy offices and you go, yeah, it's kind of the end of your monopoly rents, but it's not the end of the production of content. I mean, book publishing challenged, newspaper publishing challenged, magazine publishing. But is it the end of publishing? No, there's way more publishing than ever. And I think the same thing is gets through of programming. There's certain kinds of programming jobs, certain kinds of companies that are based around programming that are going to be challenged.
So help me put together the puzzle, excuse me, of the idea of using media, using coding and so much of that now can move to AI to some degree. Where does the developer code, or even in the low code, no code world, where do things go? Where do I learn to hone my profession? Where do I need to ramp up on in my use of AI, and
Yeah.
my other skills?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're doing this event coming up called the end of. It's called what was the future of code.
Yeah,
But if you go find this piece that I wrote called "The End of Programming as We Know It," you'll find the links to it, or maybe you can post them with this piece.
sure.
There first off, at the highest level, just look at a transition like from you know music as performed in the era of Beethoven and Mozart and whatever. These guys were performers, right? And there was no recorded music. You had basically written, it was written down. That was how it was passed along. And there were actually big companies eventually that came up, when pianos were, if people had pianos at home, and
Yeah,
that all went away. But musicianship did not go away. Composition didn't go away. Think about the transition from portrait painting to portrait photography. So if you think of programming is the act of figuring out how to solve a complex problem with the aid of computers, that's not going away, right? In fact, we'll be tackling new and harder problems.
so the problem doesn't go away, the solution changes, it
The
evolves
solution
around.
changes. It's like, okay, so you were an artist would have said, oh yeah, I used to, have to be an apprentice in some guy's workshop for 10 years and then or 20 years, and I'll finally get to paint my own paintings. And now, that was like, wow, I'll become a photographer lugging this big, heavy equipment around. And then eventually it was point and shoot, and a whole new generation of photographers came up and a whole new kind of media. And
Yeah.
so, there's going to be different kinds of programming. And the thing that's really, a lot of people saw this Satya Nadella, quoted this thing called Jevons paradox, which is that an economics idea that when something becomes cheaper, people use more of it, right? And I have a great example of that from someone I was talking to. He didn't want to give, he doesn't want, I don't want the name, but a senior tech executive who said his daughter, high school sophomore, had a summer internship at Stanford. She's a bio nerd. And she goes to this professor, for her summer internship. And he's like, he's got to give a project to this high school kid. And he says, I've just been thinking that I've just been thinking that pulse oximeters are really bad technology. They don't actually give you a really good reading. If you really want to get true blood oxygen saturation, you have to draw blood. That's not a great solution. But I've just sort of had this notion that maybe you could figure it out by looking at the blood saturation in the capillaries in the retina. Can you look into that? Right. So he throws this off, this idea that, just what the hell, go look at it. She goes and she gets all kinds of, she's not a programmer. She gets all these slides of retinas and she basically uploads all these images in Chat GPT, asks if it can isolate the, the capillaries if it can, and then she figures out how to ask it for various things. She gets it to write a program to actually calculate the blood saturation. And so you look at that, it's a one-off, kind of thing. You can take two conclusions from that. One is, oh my God, somebody did this really complicated thing without being trained as a programmer. Oh, it's the end of programming. Or you can say, wow, all of a sudden, this thing is so cheap that we can try thousands of things that might, like the cost before would have been this guy has to take this idea seriously enough that he has to write a grant. He has to hire some people. And suddenly he can just toss it off and go try this to a high school student. And she can learn enough and can do enough. Now, if this works and needs to be productized, the thing that she programmed is not a product. Somebody is still going to have to do a ton of work
Yeah.
to turn that into a product.
So
So,
that like the validation
so, so
testing.
yeah, so the surface area of what's programmable has just gotten much bigger. The surface area of the number of people who can try things, but what doesn't change, back to Jeff Bezos's thing, is that actually turning something into a reliable product is not easy. And that's
Mm.
what Adi Osmani, who I'm working with on this event about the future of coding, calls the 70% problem. And I said, no, actually, Adi, it's the 30% problem. It's the thing can get you 70% of the play there, but you have to get the other 30%, with human skills. And maybe it'll become the 90.
And then there's the percentage of time it'll take on the 70 and
Right,
30.
and it may become the 10% problem and the 90, or instead of the 30% problem, but and it may eventually become the 1% problem. But it, it gives us so much more opportunity to invent.
In terms of waves of innovation and invention, how different is the internet wave compared to the AI wave?
Well, I think they're both huge. I mean, we're still digesting. We haven't even finished digesting the internet wave. Uh, but I guess I would say the biggest difference is that in the internet wave, uh, nobody thought it was going to be valuable. And so you ended up with a lot more experimentation. And the computer scientist Donald Knuth once said, "Premature optimization is the root of all evil." And in some sense, Silicon Valley has turned into a premature optimization machine. It's just like, wow, can we? The whole Reid Hoffman. Much as I love Reid, this idea of blitz scaling as a good strategy is just a terrible idea. It's like that you buy your way to market dominance rather than you actually build a real business that gets the true product market fit. And so I think the biggest difference here is that we've wasted some time here. And maybe it is productive. I feel much better about it than like the dot-com bust. There's this whole wonderful theory of bubbles from a woman named Carlotta Perez, and Bill Janeway has written a lot about this too. And Bill has introduced the term productive bubble. I mean, Carlotta's question is always, what's left behind? And I actually wrote a piece that was pretty influential in the Web3, craze. I said why it's too early to be excited about Web3, and it was really about asking ourselves if this is a bubble. The real question you have to ask is what's left over when it pops, you know? And in the case of the dot-com bubble, it was all these data centers, it was all this dark fiber, it was a lot of expertise, there was a lot of new software been developed. In the case of the Web3 stuff, not so much. Bored apes were not actually infrastructure that was gonna mean amount to anything. And whereas AI, I think there really has been this has been a productive bubble in the sense that all this money got poured in. But it's not at all clear as people are starting to go, oh wow, the cost of inference is really going down. Oh, this stuff is now going open source, and open source is actually innovating faster. So this idea that you could just buy your way to a monopoly and get back, hundreds of billions of dollars is looking like that's going by the by. And so we're now entering the real beginning of the fertile period where people are really going to be experimenting with the constraints of finding true product market fit. And that feels like a good thing.
I was thinking along with you as you were describing that phase. You're more from the developer standpoint. I'm more looking at it from an implementation execution standpoint on the customer side. Like
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the innovation has to happen as well. They have to
Yeah.
they have to change their whole workflows and change their whole.
Totally. And, at O'Reilly, we're working very hard on that, becoming what I call AI native. And it's just pushing people to go, okay, the first stage, everybody just tries to do the old thing with some AI secret sauce added. And you go, no, 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 you don't do the old thing. You have to do something totally different,
Yeah.
and I think that we don't quite know what that is, but we should know what it's not, you
It's like
know.
going camping without a map or something, right? Or hiking.
Yeah, but
Hmm.
if you think about going camping without a map, you go, okay, well, there are principles that people who with experience can get away with that because they know quite well, and how to read the landscape.
Right. Hey Tim, I am taking a little bit too much of your time. We were on a short leash, but I did want to ask one final question. I always throw a little one out based on our conversation. I'm just thinking, if you were to start something today, like wipe the slate clean, you don't have all that enormous content at your foundation, but based on what you know, what would be the business you started as Tim O'Reilly coming out of the business womb, so to speak, and starting something new?
That's kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure I've given that much thought because we are all,
Yeah.
a creature of where we're planted. I am very, very interested in, one of the things that's been a motivating source for my business throughout my career has been a little contrary to what a lot of people think about, which is, oh, we have to find ways to build things that will please users. And I've always thought about, no, we have to find things that will fund creators. And, so just to give you an example of that, we started what became the O'Reilly online platform back in 2000 when there was a company called Books 24.7 by seven, whatever, that came to me and presented their business model. I said, "There's no money in there for the people who actually you're expecting to create this content. It's not sustainable." Right? I did the math for them, back of the napkin math over dinner,
Yeah.
and said, you really they wanted to license our books. I said, "You're offering us, 15 cents a book, you know, um, um, and we're supposed to share that with our authors." I go, "That's just not viable." So I actually started what became Safari Books Online because I knew that we had to develop a business model that would keep incentivizing people to share their value and their content. And similarly, when the book market started to decline, and we were building up this platform, we launched, on the platform in 2016, we launched live training. And it wasn't because we had this notion that this is what all of our customers are looking for. It was like, oh, the notion was, oh, this is a new way that we can create something monetizable for our authors. And so in a lot of ways, we have been driven by creator monetization
Love it.
as a kind of holy grail for our business. And so I'm actually, one of the big things that I'm really focused on is how do we create new AI native forms of monetization of expertise?
Love it. That's a great note to end on. Keep contributing to that great foundation you've already established, that legacy you've built. Thanks so much for taking this time. You know, I have 20 more questions for you, but it'll have to be another time. I really
Do
appreciate
it
it.
again another time. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Bye bye.